In this video, we're going to make some mistakes. Then we're going to pour some epoxy. And then we're going to make some more mistakes and have to phone a friend for help. But in the end, I hope we end up with a table worthy of honoring our first responders, and I hope they like it. Let's get started. So when I first started this build, I was not even 100% sure that I was even going to film it. So that's why you see this slab here already flattened. And this is the bottom side. So when I flip it over, you're going to see the top side where I've actually already carved in what I'm going to put on it. So that part wasn't exactly planned. Turns out you also see my very first mistake right here as well. So this all started out when the table that I was using in my classroom became, well, let's just say not so desirable to look at. So I wanted to do something nicer for the office. So I thought, you know, why not build an epoxy table? And then dedicate it to our wonderful EMTs and paramedics that I have the honor of working with. So that's what we set out to do. So when I was thinking about what type of table to do, I got to thinking there's not a lot more resilient than resin, kind of matching how resilient our EMTs and paramedics are. So that's what I wanted to do, is build them some type of epoxy table. So I reached out to Super Clear Epoxy and Eye Candy Pigments to see if they were interested in helping me with this project. They didn't hesitate in sending over the resin and the pigments to take care of this. I'll leave links to both in the description. Thanks to both of them. Now, my company has a very specific color that we have as far as our brand goes, and they don't sell that exact color, of course, at Eye Candy. So I had to get creative and mess with some colors and try to get a mixture that I thought was going to match pretty close. Don't let this scene fool you and think that I got this right on the first time, because I certainly did not. I probably went through, I don't know, 1.5 gallons of water, mixing the colors together before I ended up getting one that I thought was going to be pretty close to what I needed. The good thing is I kept up with the ratio of each color to another, just in case there was a mistake made. Little did I know I was currently making a mistake at this time. So I'm glad I did that, so I was able to match the color again. You'll see what I'm talking about soon. So I always put caulking around anything I'm going to overfill. What you didn't see is off camera, I also put a little shellac in these areas to keep from bleeding over so much, even though I knew I was going to resurface it anyway. It just ensures things don't run everywhere. And if you have any colors closer together, just keeps them from mixing. It's just a lot simpler that way. And it ensures you get your pockets completely filled up, because epoxy does shrink as it cures. So this is just helpful. But I'm sitting here thinking as I'm pouring this and thinking, you know, what color epoxy do I use around the outside edges here? Because I've clearly got a big space to fill. So after sitting here looking at the table over and over, I thought probably it would be best if I called somebody who knew a lot about epoxy and epoxy tables. So I thought I'd phone a friend. Okay, let's see if he'll answer.
Hey, man.
Hey, Cam. Thought I might pick your brain for a second on a table that I'm doing.
Happy to help.
So I'm trying to choose which color to use. It's walnut. It's got some epoxy inlays, but it's mainly a walnut table. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I like both colors.
What do you mean both colors?
Black and charcoal.
Somehow I expected that. Okay, last thing. So when I was putting this table in the mold, it was heavy, and of course I'm not quite as strong as you and can move them all around by myself, but I put it in the wrong way. It still works, but now the problem is I have excess epoxy that's going to be on one tip of it. And so I don't know, I'll shoot you a picture maybe later and let you see what I'm talking about, but do you think I should cut that off or just leave it?
You're asking me if I think the tip should be cut off. And I know what you're doing. Don't think that I don't. And I will not be canceled again. The anti-circumcision crowd already came after me, so I will not even dignify that with a response. Probably cut it off.
Haha, point taken. So after getting some good advice from my buddy Cam, I set off to mix this epoxy. This is a 2-to-1 mixture. But what you may not realize here is I'm actually making my third mistake of this pour. Although this is a 2-to-1 mixture, one thing I did not pay attention to, completely my fault, is if you can see here, this is 24-hour deep pour, where it is good for some applications for sure. If you're pouring, like an inch thick, but the problem is I'm pouring almost 3 inches thick, so this is certainly not going to work. So after rushing around to get some molds made up so I could not waste all of this epoxy, I did get some nice charcuterie boards out of it. I decided to come back and mix the appropriate epoxy. And as you can see here, this is liquid glass 2 to 4 inch thick deep pour. Yeah, this would be appropriate. I could have cut every bit of that out, but I think it's super important in these videos. You see that we make mistakes. I'm by far any expert on this. We all make mistakes. No matter how many times you do this, you're going to make mistakes. And it's okay. You just hope you don't waste a lot of epoxy and you have some molds laying around so you can make charcuterie boards. So now I'm going to mix for the rest of my life, or at least what seems like an eternity.
One eternity later.
Now that that's over, I'm going to use this pigment paste from Eye Candy. I absolutely love this paste, and it works great, and it's very opaque, and it doesn't take much at all. This is 3 gallons, and I've got very, very little bit on the end of this stick compared to some. So it works terrific. Just a quick note about mixing epoxy. You can absolutely use a drill to mix and a paddle mixer when you're mixing a deep pour epoxy. You don't have to worry about that. It does entrain bubbles, but what I do is I pour it into a smaller container because I don't have a huge vacuum chamber. But I do use a vacuum chamber on all my deep pours, just for me to pour in, or to get in there and get all the bubbles out. The truth is you don't need to do that. This deep pour epoxy will off gas if you just let it sit. But, that would steal the fun of being able to pop a few little bubbles that you get when you pour it into your mold. It's kind of satisfying. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to pour the epoxy in. So I went ahead and poured this first bucket, and everything seemed to be fine. That was until I poured the second bucket and started realizing when I had put this in the mold the wrong way, I did have to slide it back. Therefore, I should have checked the caulking, but I did not. So it wound up causing a small little leak. And by small leak, what I mean is about 1/2 gallon, because this should have originally been 5.5 gallons. It took me 6, but luckily I had some of this Flex Seal on hand. Thank you, Cam, for that advice from the past, and it actually worked pretty well. It did take probably a little over half the can, but I was able to get the leak stopped. So after avoiding that disaster, I let this thing set up for about a week.
1 week later.
Then I'm going to take it out. I'm going to square up all the edges. I like to use, once I get a square edge, I like to use my TSO guide here. It just helps me, keeps me from having to measure and make marks. But one thing you got to keep in mind when you're cutting epoxy with a track saw, well, with anything for that matter, is epoxy makes a huge mess. But it's a necessary evil. But if you see this happening with like my last cut here with the blowback at the end, yeah, that's not supposed to happen. So basically now you're just going to have to take the cover off the track saw and just get in there and clean the mess out, because I'm pretty sure it's probably clogged up a little bit in here, and we got to get it clean. Damn! Yeah, so it kind of makes a mess. It's not too bad to clean out. You just really got to pull it out and then blow it out with some air, and it's fine. But you just got to keep an eye on it when you're cutting epoxy, because this is inevitable. It's going to happen. So once I got this trimmed down, you're going to see kind of what I was talking about from the very beginning of this video about my first mistake. Well, I did not think about the epoxy not coming all the way to the top when I did the edges. So in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have carved out the center until I got to the end of the table. So in the end, to get down to where the epoxy was and how deep my mold was, I really had no choice but to take everything off, including the Star of Life and all the epoxy that I had put in the middle. So we just quickly did the top part and then flipped it over and got a nice flat bottom, and then we'll just flip it over and get it down to its final thickness here, and we'll play a little montage here. A little bittersweet to see it go away, but luckily I had the colors written down, so I was able to mix it. And just for a minute, as we carve out the Star of Life, let's pause and honor the bravery and sacrifice of our first responders. They really are the guiding lights in times of darkness, the pillars of strength in moments of chaos. And this table is really a way of saying thank you for their unwavering service. So for my CNC folks out there watching, the bits that I use in this entire project are coming from two companies. One, the Jenny Bits, jennybits.com. I'll leave a link in the description for those, as well as a code for you to get 10% off. And the flattening bit that I was using here is also from another company called IDC Woodcraft, idcwoodcraft.com. I'll leave a link in the description also with a code for percentage off. And with that, our colors are done. So I like to think that the hard part's over, but I would be lying because we still have to sand. So really on epoxy table, you're going to do a flood coat on. On the top side, you really don't have to sand any higher than about 150 grit. You can go to 180 or 220 if you'd like, but usually at about 150, maybe 180, you get all of the swirls and everything out of it. So once you flood coat it, it'll be perfect anyway. So that's what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and sand all the way through the grits. I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to sand the bottom, and then we're going to cut out the indentions for the legs. Indentions are, I guess they're more like pockets, whatever. Anyway, so I like to do this. You don't have to do this. You can certainly just screw the legs directly to the bottom of the table, and that would be just fine. But I prefer to just recess mine. I just think it gives it a cleaner look. And the legs here that I have, also reached out to Flowy Line Design, and they were gracious enough to send me these over. They're a supporter of the channel. I'll leave a link to them in the description as well. They make some really good metal legs, some very nice designs. So really all I'm doing here is I'm getting it marked up, getting my measurements, getting it marked up, and then I'm going to make me a template, so to speak, or jig, or whatever you want to call it, so I can actually route out the little pocket this is going to be sitting in down into on both sides. I guess that was a couple of minutes of, what is that, ASMR or whatever. Maybe you enjoyed it. Maybe you didn't. I don't know. I can't say that I work a lot with hand tools, but I can say that I did get this on video, so I can say that I do use hand tools, even if it's on occasion, every once in a while. Not very often, unless you consider a router in your hand a hand tool. And yes, before anybody in the comments says that this is not the appropriate way to use a brad point bit, I'm aware, but it does work. I love this little pump thing here. I think I picked it up on Amazon a while back. If I find it, I'll leave a link, but I put denatured alcohol in it, and it's just awesome just to be able to put your rag on top and just make a couple of pumps, and there you go. And I'm going to finish the bottom of this table with Rubio Pure. This kind of is my go-to finish on a good majority of my projects. I just think it looks good. But it is a hard wax oil, but I'm going to go ahead and spread it on. Then I'm going to rub it in with this little Scotch-Brite top pad here. Wait about 15-20 minutes and then wipe off the excess. I'm going to let this sit and cure pretty well for probably several days after I get all my holes drilled and everything for my threaded inserts, because what I'm going to do when I come back is I know I'm going to flood coat this, and I really don't want to have to deal with trying to resand the bottom and then refinishing it. So I'm going to actually put tape, like a tuck tape, around the edges. That way the drips will get on the tape, and once it's cured, I can literally just come and pop the tape off, and it should pop all of the drips off. At least that's the expectation. And most of the time it works. And yes, I know you don't have to, but I do put a little bit of CA glue on my threaded inserts. I just feel better about it. And at least in my mind, it holds better and doesn't back out. So there you go. Now we're just going to get it cleaned up and ready for the pours. So let me explain how I do this a little bit. Maybe it will help somebody out if you're curious. So I do at least 2 coats of epoxy on the top first. Basically, the first coat is to do nothing but help level the surface out, because there's inevitably going to be some dips and so on and so forth. Although I didn't have a lot, but there are some. So I put this on very thin. I measure it out at approximately 1 ounce of epoxy per square foot. I let that completely cure. Then I come back and I lightly sand it with 220 grit sandpaper. I know I'm going to have some low spots like you see here. I want to leave those low spots, because then I'm going to come back with a second coat at a 1 ounce per square foot. Then I'm going to do the exact same things. Let that cure, come back with 220 grit sandpaper. Then I will do my final flood coat. This is the one that's going to be your top. This one I do at 3 ounces per square foot. That gives you good coverage, probably about an 16 to an 1/8 inch, covering. But it works. It works very well. I also like to wear a glove, and then as I'm spreading it around, once I get over to the edge and it starts to run off, I'll take my hand and wipe it around the edge. It kind of breaks that surface tension and allows the epoxy to flow over the edge more evenly, and you don't get any of the runs, kind of like you see when you do paint and you get runs. The same thing will happen with epoxy if you don't spread it out good and break the surface tension. The last part of my finishing process is I'm going to clean the table off really well, and then I'm going to come back and put a ceramic coating. I am going to use 2 coats of the hard coat and 2 coats of the top coat. This is going to give me a pretty durable finish. This is going to end up being in a pretty high traffic area at my headquarters. So I wanted to make sure it was pretty well protected. This is pretty easy to apply. Basically, with most all of your nano coats, this one is carbon methods. You're just going to basically work in sections. I'm going to work in 2 sections, one on each side. You're going to make a well line. You're going to come up, you're going to draw it across, and then you're simply going to pull from that well line up to your other area where you're stopping, and then go back in the opposite direction. You're going to do that, wait about a minute, come back, and then you're going to hold your pad at a 45-degree angle, and you're going to basically buff the top, knock down the high spots by doing that. Then you're going to let this set up for about another minute or so, and then you're going to come back and buff it out with a clean rag. Here, they give you the microfiber rag in the kits. And that's really it. You got to do that for both sections. Let it cure and do your second coat. And the top coat is applied in the same manner. So really all we have left to do is get the legs put on, get this thing packaged up and ready for delivery. I do try to leave the plastic that these legs come in on them as long as possible. It just saves me stress and headache about bumping into them or something happening and ruining the legs. So I did have to enlist the help of one of my fellow paramedic colleagues to get this table inside because I definitely couldn't lift this thing alone. It was definitely nice to be able to get this thing in, get it unwrapped, and be able to see the reaction of everyone while it was unveiled, and just to see that they really were happy with the table and what it looked like. I think it was a huge success. So once I got it nice and cleaned up, I invited everyone in and gave them their first look at the table. Thank you so much for watching.